Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is staying safe amidst COVID-19. I'm William McKenzie of Tezos Commons, and I will be moderating the discussion today. So we have a special TezTalks live for you all, but before we get into everything, let's take some time to discuss some of our activities at Tezos Commons. Last year, actually around the same time, Tezos Commons started TezTalks featuring notable speakers from the Tezos ecosystem, such as Kathleen Brightman, Melton DeMoores, Allison of TQ Tezos, and many more. This year, we have extended TezTalks to the digital space with TezTalks Live, and also our recently launched TezTalks Radio podcast series. Earlier this month, we had Baking Bad on TezTalks Live, who gave a demo of Better Call Dev 2. Today, we're going to have a more kind of conversational and roundtable type discussion that is focused on the state of the Tezos ecosystem. So without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce some of the speakers we will have today. The speakers participating today are Shaun Belcher, the Executive Director of Tezos Commons. We have Alex Liu of Tezos Commons. And lastly, we have Jacob Arluck, founder of Tokevel Group. So let's go ahead and kick things off. Shaun, would you mind introducing yourself and give a bit of info on Tezos Commons to the audience?
Sure, and just to be fair, it's TQ Tezos now. It's a little harder to associate TQ with Tocqueville. So I'm the executive director of Tezos Commons, and a lot of what we've done is focused on community-related activities and education. And I want to discuss a little bit about what we're working on this year. And everything sort of took a spin with the COVID outbreak. So we weren't able to pursue our dreams with global events, which is sad because we don't get to see all of you in person. So we've kind of taken a spin and we've rebooted TezTalks to be more of a media-driven digital outlet for our podcast video show that Will's been working on with AJ. A lot of you know AJ already from the community. But we've also added a couple people like Brian Lee, Alex Liu, and others. So I'm glad that Alex is actually joining us today. He's our newest board member that we added back in February. And in sort of a parting regard, saying our goodbyes to Stephen Andrews as his schedule will no longer fit the ability to contribute. So thank you for joining us, Alex.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So some of what we're focusing on is trying to aggregate information and sort of consensus building activities, as well as diving a little bit into the development space in Tezos. So among the educational stuff, we're going to have more articles. We're going to bring more materials for you on what's emerging in Tezos, who's involved in it, and try to bring more voices on so you can actually meet them in person or interact with them online. Tezos has come a long way in the last year, and we haven't really had an ecosystem update to share out with everybody. So I think this is a good time to sort of reflect on how far we've come and what we've built and where we see Tezos coming. And that's also part of the reason we have Jacob on with us today, discuss a little bit about what his organization is doing, TQ Tezos, and so the emerging DeFi space on Tezos, which is incredibly important. So along with our educational role in the ecosystem, we've also started up in research and development, and mostly in contributing towards a community wallet known as Kukai. Some of you have used it. And so we're contributing to the code base for Kukai as sort of a testing ground in trying to make wallets more accessible and also smooth out some of the bugs that we have in the existing ecosystem. On top of that, we're building some core libraries that we're going to go into a little bit more detail about on an Agora post in the coming weeks, which will be effectively making it easier for anybody to launch a wallet and focus on the more important aspect, which is the end user experience, which comes into you need to spend more time in experimental UI, UX, and how that plays out. Crypto isn't exactly friendly today for anybody to join into. It's easy to go to a secondary market like Coinbase and create an account, and whether you want to stake your assets or have them hold it. But as many of you know in the community, it's not a good idea for long-term storage. We do not recommend it. And to that effect, how can we make crypto more accessible? How can we expand this idea of like non-custodial wallets and services, and also just make it more accessible to developers in that regard? So that's some of what we're going to try to get into. We also recently started working towards a wallet working group, which we hope to have other wallet developers join if there's interest. Everything is opt-in, of course, not pushing this on anyone. And so this is, we hope to add some stability and support to the wallet aspect of Tezos and try to drive some new features there. So unfortunately, we're not looking at having events this year. That didn't quite pan out. I don't think any of this is expected, but if the chance comes up, we'll keep you informed as to what's coming up. For now, we'll do our best to try to at least inform you of the virtual events that are coming up, when we're going to have talks. We have Ready Layer 1 that's coming up. We have a few people speaking for Ready Layer 1, including Arthur. So I'm looking forward to that. And I believe there's still some tickets. If you guys have a chance, you can put the link in the chat. And so, yeah, that's a little bit of what we've been working on the last few months. It's been a pretty big pivot for all of us. Most of us have been in quarantine for over a month. So it's a little bit difficult to operate, but generally it hasn't slowed anything in terms of development on the Tezos, in the Tezos ecosystem.
Thanks for that intro, Shaun.
Sure.
Moving on, Alex, would you mind introducing yourself to the audience and giving a bit of info on your background?
Yeah, so hi all. If you didn't know me by now, my name is Alex Liu. A little bit about me is that I started practicing law in 2011 in the state of Louisiana, and then I decided to go ahead and get my license in Missouri also, just to have a little dichotomy of civil and common law. And so now I'm practicing both in Louisiana and Missouri. Let's see, my background. I first started off in my legal career as a public defender, defending those who are indigent, who can't afford an attorney, being charged with crimes. Did that for about 3 years, and then I switched over to corporate law, where I was general counsel for a restaurant group. And I did that for about 4.5 years. And then from that point on, I branched off. This past year, I've been partly working and partly going back to school to get my master's of law, which is kind of a specialty in terms of that I'm focused on is just security regulations and a little bit of tax. A little about how I got into the Tezos community. Well, in early 2018, I started, seeing things about cryptocurrency, and especially I sat on the sideline just kind of watching this space. And then finally, I just decided to, dip my toes into the Tezos sphere. And, first I was intrigued about being a baker. So it took, I did all these nights of research trying to figure out how to launch a node. Took me about, a good, I wouldn't say about a month and a half to figure out how to launch a node, but I finally got one up. And now I've been running a private bakery since about cycle 60-ish. But that's a little about my Tezos side. And then on the other side of things of what I'm doing, this past year, I've had the luck and ability to go back to school to get my master's of law. But while I was doing that, I really got to focus on doing a lot of heavy research and writing. And one of the spheres that I've been tackling, and one of the papers that I'm working on right now, working on getting published is this paper I finished probably about the end of October, which everyone knows that the most daunting question in the crypto sphere is pretty much, what constitutes as a security. Everyone knows about the infamous Howey test, which is about, over 100 years old. But, in my paper that I've been working on and that's going through peer review right now is that, yes, in one sense that the Howey test is still viable today because it looks at really the economic effects of what's going on. But one of the things that I argue in my paper is just that right now, the regulators are doing regulation by enforcement instead of enforcement by regulation. And the difference between that is that with regulation by enforcement, you're kind of creating this roadmap as you go along. In every case that the SEC prosecutes and things like that, it creates not necessarily de facto law, but basically it's like a guidance until someone challenges it. And so in my paper that I've been working on, and I've been meeting with academics and also a few regulators here and there, what I've been trying to preach to them is that we need a flexible test, one that also allows people that want to create something in the crypto sphere or on the blockchain world, allows them to have flexibility without, the thought of, hey, if I create this product, am I going to get the SEC breathing down my neck and knocking on my door saying that I created a security without, registering and then face all these potential civil monetary penalties or things like that. And so this test that I've been lobbying for is this kind of like a cumulative effects test where you take all the circumstances around looking at what you're creating, and then for the SEC to tell you whether you have an exception or you don't need to register or something like that. They look at it case by case basis because there's certain things that they look at which might be more important than other factors, like how many, if you're really a decentralized network, how many nodes do you have? How many validating nodes? How many endorsers? How many, in the Tezos world, how many bakers do you have? And, what sort of fail safes are occurring on that network and things like that, and just kind of branching out and mitigating the risk. Now, I think everyone, that's joining us knows that this regulatory sphere is just in a constant state of flux where you have regulatory pressures and then you have outside lobbyist groups that are trying to all influence to get us on the same path. But right now it's just kind of fractioned. And, I think when people hear, big companies like Facebook and Libra, we kind of get this sour taste in our mouth and just kind of a negative image. However, that's not really the case because they are on one hand, they're actually helping us push this blockchain into the mainstream media and getting, older Congress people to actually focus and listen to what we've been talking about. And, sometimes it takes the big boys like Facebook and Libra to come in to help. But ultimately, I think this sphere is growing. And if people are asking me to make a prediction like they, sometimes do, right now I would say no comment, just because, every day it seems like we're getting more and more mixed signals. And so this space, as ripe as it is, in terms of growing, I think we still got a lot more growing to do at this point in time. And but it's certainly headed towards a good path because you're starting to see more and more regulated entities coming into the sphere and actually taking part of it. That's certainly a good sign. Now it's going to be all the way. I think it's going to take an act of Congress to unify all of this. But, we're slowly growing, and I think we're getting good attention. And the last thing about me, I think, also about coming into this Tezos world, as you heard from Shaun, I just recently joined TCF's board. I'm very proud and glad to be on it to help TCF and everything that they do, like put on this podcast. And I think they do great work. And part of before all that, I think what people also know me by is that I wrote a lot about the litigation and Tezos Foundation and the Brightmans being locked in this potential class action lawsuit in California. And my next article that I'm going to be working on is, well, that I'm actually working on right now as we speak, is just answering a lot of questions that people have about the settlement. I kind of gave a little teaser, just giving in the, boilerplate, the big points of what's going on in it. And then now we're going to be moving towards taking questions and start answering people's questions about, like what might they do to participate if the settlement goes through and things like that. But, I want to tell everyone to, just rest assured, I am keeping track of it. The next court date on the schedule right now for the litigation is June 4th. So we have a lot of time right now to cover all this and to answer questions. So if you guys have questions, just feel free to reach out to me on Telegram or on Twitter or through Tezos Commons.
Alex, maybe towards the end we can get a little bit into where we see this going for proof of stake in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so just if you guys have questions about the litigation stuff, we will carry on with that. But I guess I'll save the proof of stake talk regulatory towards the end of this chat, so I don't hog up more time, and hopefully Jacob has some great things to say.
Yeah. Most importantly, I think that a lot of people are interested in, especially with the emergence of TZBTC, is DeFi coming to Tezos. I mean, it's pretty much been exclusive to Ethereum, and they've done an excellent job in building some really interesting instruments and tools around the DeFi space. Jacob, did you want to introduce yourself a little bit and talk about not only what TQ is working on, but what you see is going on in the DeFi space?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me on. So I think to start, I'll just give you a quick background. So originally got involved in the project about 2 years ago, around just ahead of the launch. Was sort of involved in some of the operational stuff around launching the network, and then after that, sort of decided to basically co-found TQ with Allison and Chris, and basically we created the organization, sort of in New York, and basically focus on public good. So what we saw like right after the launch was that 2 years ago is that basically on Ethereum they had spent however many years since their launch, like sort of focusing on building the necessary building blocks to get started and actually sort of pave the way for adoption. So as an example, the analogy I usually give is it's like having you want to build a house, but you also have to build a sink, and you also have to build your bathtub and all these things first. So what we're trying to do is trying to provide those like basic primitives so you can build your house and not have to worry about all these little components that you might have to otherwise have sort of develop along the way if nobody's done it for you already. And so that also goes to what you're saying, Shaun, about wallet working groups and libraries that people can reference wallets that people can basically spin up. So in Ethereum, what's been really successful is a lot of prepackaged stuff in around the Web3.js libraries, and basically allows people to just easily embed a wallet or an application into their application. And so I think that's really sort of the vision there, as I can understand it, and that seems like a really good, a really good example of this kind of like public goods approach, where you're trying to like basically build the stuff that if you don't have it pre-built, then it's pretty. Otherwise, people have to sort of do this from scratch. And we've sort of seen it over and over with all the different applications that have been trying to use TezBridge to sort of use as their signer and as their wallet. And basically, like the UX has been pretty difficult. And so I know, AirGap is working on stuff around this application called Beacon, you guys are working on some extensible stuff that people could use and to deploy into their application. And then you also, it sounds like, have a really cool wallet. But what we're working on is obviously not on the wallet side. We're very focused on sort of a few key areas. So the main one, the place that we put a lot of our efforts is around open source standards around assets, basically. So how do you represent assets on the Tezos chain? So we started by sort of just creating a simple port of ERC20, like back in 2019. We sort of used that to sort of buy us the time to basically focus on building a feedback process that could allow us to create sort of a differentiated standard for Tezos. So the focus, and we'll be releasing implementations and a lot more information probably later this week. But basically, in early March, we released basically our a proposal basically to create an interface standard for assets that isn't just specific to, say, like a fungible asset contract like ERC20, but also lets you do NFTs, also lets you do multi-asset contracts where you could, for example, have so many different tokens, many different types of tokens, all living in the same contract or with the same interface. And so this is really based on sort of a lot of the sort of industry feedback and advice that we got from folks on Ethereum. So the benefit that we have, being a newer entrant in the market, is that on Ethereum they sort of built, although they already have these standards and things like that, they sort of built them as they need. They arrived as they needed them. So as a result, there's a lot of things that they kind of can't do because they had to basically they already have pre-existing sort of support in wallets and applications and all these things. And so what we sort of thought is like, well, wait a second. And the advice that we got from a lot of folks in Ethereum was, don't focus on just copying what's been done previously. Just like rather focus on, sort of what, a way to basically remove as much friction as possible and provide, more, basically more, sort of capabilities than what's available, currently in any one Ethereum standard. And so there's a lot of these sort of trade-offs you have to balance in all of that, but that's where we spent a lot of our time. We're also working on, sort of sandboxes and basically, sort of a private chain deployment of Tezos, with, sort of like we're looking at like orchestration or and stuff like that, that we think is really, it's really going to help us, sort of, if you think about it from the, how do we let like sort of anyone get started and sort of, sort of whether it's, someone in a corporate environment, someone who's in a, sort of say in DeFi, or just a general interest developer, we're trying to capture sort of, sort of an easy onboarding for all those folks. And obviously stuff like Truffle, is going to help in that regard as well. And then on the DeFi side, the way I think we see it is like that we're really just creating like open source, sort of standards and some implementations if people are interested in trying them out. And then sort of we'll see what happens in terms of like people sort of basically now they'll have this on the shelf, like sort of the stuff that powers the sort of Ethereum open finance ecosystem. And things like that are, sort of a lot of those tools are sort of, as I say, like just describing, like are sort of materializing, and folks can, sort of build on top of those as they see fit. And I think that kind of, trying to sort of lay the foundations for like an organic ecosystem and one where people like really want to, sort of just come in and they just don't have to think about those things, but also, and that those standards and tools are sort of actually supportive rather than things that sort of really make their sort of make things challenging, sort of where they have to reinvent the wheel or create new, build the primitives themselves. Like we want to basically avoid that kind of fate, because that's really what sort of held back Tezos like from sort of in its early days. We're also pretty involved with the smart contract language development. So we were pretty involved with SmartPy, and then we're also like directly contributing to the project there. And then we've also done some work with the legal folks. Like we've given them a lot of feedback on the language while we've been developing different smart contracts and applications and things. And so they've gotten a lot of sort of feedback from us on basically the state of the language and how it can be improved and all that sort of thing. And then lastly, we obviously do a whole host of other stuff other than just sort of this sort of open source product development type of work. We also are pretty involved with Agora, like with the folks you folks at Tezos Commons Foundation, and then also we do various work around like trying to build like sort of different materials like sort of describing Tezos or things like that. And so that I'd say that's our general focus in the last like however many months has really been around sort of building those key primitives. But in the interim, we're definitely sort of also working. That's what we're doing in the interim, but also like bigger picture, we're also working on sort of a lot of other initiatives that sort of tie into all these other sort of underlying product foundations and open source foundations.
I think we can dive in. Earlier, you brought up the issue of trying to remove as much friction as possible when it comes to DeFi. Were there any like frictions in particular that you found to be challenging?
Yeah, so there's a lot of weird, strange UX, user experience around how you permission and use assets on Ethereum. So ERC20 has sort of this strange. So these are just like some small details that actually make it a real pain to sort of interact with and permission assets. So as an example, like for example, there's this notion of approve. On ERC20 allows you to basically allow another contract to move your tokens around for when you interact with the DEX, it allows it to basically move transfer their tokens to the DEX, etc. Now the problem with this is that it's both too enabling of the DEX. So now the DEX can basically touch all your funds, and that's not great. Well, depending on there's this notion of allowance, but most people set it to infinity. So basically, it means that you're approving the DEX to approve, to access all your funds. And then even worse, like people often leave that on. So it's like both high friction, like there's multiple steps to like approve and do all this, basically this permissioning, UX. But there's also like it not only is it like cumbersome, it's also takes a long. It basically like opens you up to all sorts of vulnerability if you leave it like that. And there's very little UX abstraction around like managing which contracts sort of have access to your funds or can interact with funds. So a lot of the focus that we've been thinking about is basically how do we sort of build something that sort of is both really easy to use, is pretty inexpensive from a gas perspective as we can get it, and then also sort of can eventually take advantage of like new primitives that sort of come into the core protocol. So one of the things that's been discussed on Tezos Agora is this notion of contract signatures, or what people call stamps. And the idea there is sort of like instead of having sort of the forcing like sort of all these sort of checks and callbacks around whether or not someone has permission to sort of share to permit these tokens, you can actually sort of almost like have the permissions attached to the tokens when you send them to a DEX. So it's as if you're just sending sending Tez to a contract, and then you can sort of basically have permission to act on those tokens. And so things like that won't come till for later, but trying to set things up so that we can sort of take advantage of some of these innovations sort of as they come, and basically sort of try to differentiate Tezos in terms of DeFi. So the idea is like, how do you get the composability and the like developer experience that you have on Ethereum, or even better, while also having something that's cheap and extremely safe and avoids a lot of the like secure safety sort of concerns around composing different sort of assets and exchanges and things like. I don't know if anyone in the chat has seen like the recent DeForce hack, things like trying to avoid things like that while also having a really, really nice UX. That's sort of like that holy grail that a lot of different projects are sort of trying to push for, whether it's Flow from Dapper Labs or Facebook Libra's like Move or things like that. Like they're all sort of trying to move in this direction of sort of how do you do safe permissioning that's like provides a very nice developer UX. And that's sort of what we're I think we're a lot of the our heads are at around doing this work. But then it's also about how it integrates with libraries and with having really nice integration like tools and things like that. And that's where folks in the ecosystem come in other parts of the ecosystem come in. Like, so Labs is working on some really cool integration tooling and has been doing, some really exceptional tutorials around how to use Shuffle with some of these new smart contract standards that we've been working on, stuff like that. And we're pretty optimistic to see what happens, once all this sort of starts taking off.
Jacob, I actually have a question for you. Could you get into the status of Kiln software?
Yeah, sure. So Kiln is a great one. So it's an interesting one as well. So obviously really successful. It's like arguably the reason why Tezos is like, not a network like EOS, right? So a network like EOS or Tron or whatever that has like 21 or 27 validators, like that, like nobody's using something like Kiln to validate on there. Like they don't even, that's not even in the design, that's not even in the thought process of anyone. So like the idea of making it accessible for anyone with a ledger and a computer to easily, work with, basically validate the network is like a really, really like cool thing. The thing that's also important though is to understand is like, that project in general, or that was an application, like, and I recently replied to someone on Agora about this. Like basically, there's a real opportunity to make it a lot more multi-stakeholder and open and properly open source. And so rather than sort of relying on this thing powers 25% of all the validator nodes on validators on Tezos. It's really important that it have like different forms of redundancy in terms of the development of its in its repo. And there's a lot of parts of it that we thought in general we identified like that there have been parts of it that have been either just a little bit on a slower timeline than we thought was needed, and things like Mac and things like that, Mac builds and stuff like that. And then also it would be great to have like integrations with other with other ecosystem entities throughout, whether it's folks like Baking Bad or whomever is interested and can provide contribution to it. And basically a lot of that is probably going to involve, that work is going to involve like rewriting maybe the front end of it so right now it's in this like Haskell JavaScript sort of like front end library, sort of replacing that with like a traditional web stack, and then making it easier to audit, making it easier to make sure that it's safe, stuff like that. But also adding things like support for the Baker registry when you sign up. So like when you sign up and create a Baker, it'd be cool to have this really smooth, amazing onboarding experience where you put in your Baker information, that you want, you say whether it's accepting delegation, things like that, and then go from there. And then allow for plugins down the road or something like that, where people can add, if they want to, if they are, want to do, sort of interact with Agora, or they want to do signaling, or things like that. It allows like people to build up tools and things like that that serve bakers in an open way, safe way. But that's the basic idea. It's basically becoming a multi-stakeholder project. It already kind of was, but the idea is to make it a more explicitly multi-stakeholder project that has inputs from many parts of the ecosystem, that is basically properly open source sustainable. So it has like accessible. It's based on accessible libraries and tools, and also probably one of the other things to pair with this would be, it'd be really great to do like a proper focus a lot on growing the number of solo bakers, like just flat out, like we right now the number of solo bakers. I mean it's definitely I would love to see how many bakers there are who do not take delegation and how that number has changed over the past few years. We really should maybe all look at that. But regardless of what that number is, we obviously can do better. And I think that starts by making it more accessible, having a really easy Mac build, eventually having a Windows build, etc. And then from there, basically allowing, trying to expand the number of solo bakers. It would be great to see 1,000, 2,000 bakers someday on, especially solo bakers doing Tezos on Tezos. I mean, Ethereum folks like a Consensus and the Ethereum Foundation, they're putting a lot of effort into for when Ethereum 2.0 launches, which, obviously, a long project, but with the beacon chain, like there will be a staking opportunity for a lot of people pretty quick early on. They're putting a lot of effort into that, like, sort of staking UI, staking interface. And I think we should put a lot of effort into that as well. We already have with Kiln, but as an ecosystem, but it would be great to make that even more accessible and make that more, allow us to basically grow the number of bakers by, solo bakers by, in an ideal world, like something like 10x. I mean, you look, the number of new people entering the ecosystem, like even if you get 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000, or baking, right? That's like a really serious, like if you have,
still several thousand. I think we have close to 500,000 accounts right now.
Yeah. So if 1% bakes, or if 0.5% bakes, right? Like that's pretty respectable. So a really sizable number of bakers. And so, and I would argue, I think we'd all argue that one of the main reasons people don't bake is, that it's not as accessible as it should be. And so trying to focus on that and making sure that, the underlying infrastructure that powers it is, sort of sustainable, is open, is easily audited, and is safe is I think a really key part of that.
Yeah, I mean, that is part of it. I also think that lowering the roll size will help in terms of reducing the opportunity costs. Some people see it attached to it, or just general accessibility. I'd also like to see other ways that people could earn Tez and secure the network. So, I mean, but Kilden's going to be a major driver. A lot of people have been requesting a Windows and a Mac OS build for some time. And I think ultimately our goal would be to see most of these projects that are being built to become multi-stakeholder, where we have lots of contributors, versus just firing up new siloed projects.
No, exactly. And the whole beauty of this technology is that it's supposed to be this open open source stack that lots of people can contribute to, and it's a healthy open source ecosystem. And it's really hard to do that when you have without going too much in the weeds, but it's harder to do that when you have very things are built on very proprietary or inaccessible tech stacks. And so
just
a lot of yeah, exactly. And so it's is this built in the service of Tezos, or is it built in the service of other sort of goals? And Kiln should certainly be able to build in and maintain in the service of Tezos overall. So as a network. So I think that's going to be something where I'm really excited to see what can be developed. Another thing, just really quick on that, is it also provides the opportunity to build adjacently something similar to Kaleido on Ethereum, which is basically sort of basically a really easy to deploy basically a user interface for really easily deploying sort of private chains, Tezos private chains and sandboxes and things. And so that would be super useful as well, where it's just we want to minimize the amount of sort of reliance on sort of traditional human interaction for people to get started, and really try to scale up. Things like that are really gonna same thing with making Kill more accessible, making sandboxes and proof of concepts and demos a lot more accessible. If you just if you just get if you have 1,000 more people able to 1,000 times more people able to do a demo or try out Tezos, you just need one of them to actually see it through to really see a benefit, right? Potentially. So
what do you see for uses on deployment of private chains?
So
I might not understand why.
Yeah. So to me, a private chain is just always about in the service of public, right? So I don't view we don't view private chain as a separate beast where you want to have people siloed inside a private chain. I think we view it actually similar to how a lot of other projects have started to come to realize, which is that there are a lot of use cases where, and I hesitate to use phrase use cases because it's so abused, but there are a lot of areas where different entities, whether they be central banks or big companies or whomever, or a consortium of electronic medical records companies or something like that, where they don't want to start off using the public ledger. They want to basically sort of initially do a proof of concept on a consortium chain or whatever, and then down the road consider going to a public chain, or have both coexist. Maybe you have the settlement is to something on the main chain, but you're using layer 2, or you're using things like roll-ups and things like that to really do most of the heavy lifting. And so that seems to be where a lot of things are going, where in the industry broadly. There's obviously a lot of stuff, especially in DeFi and other kinds of open applications, centralized applications, where you really want everything to be rooted on the main chain, and it probably never goes onto a private instance such as this. But for a lot of applications, there's a lot of benefit to at least providing the option for people to get started without like alerting the whole world that they're on the main chain, or like waiting until, for example, we have privacy, the option to do private contracts and things like that on the main chain. So there's a lot of bridging that probably needs to happen. And then the other benefit is to try to get a network, and the thing that's really been successful for Ethereum is about getting network effects around the technology. So I feel like there's sort of two kinds of network effects around blockchains. The first one is around them as like sort of decentralized consensus or money and things like that, and then and sort of censorship resistance. The other kind is, in my opinion, and I think is a pretty widely held view, is around like like standards and technology, stack and stuff like that. And so where Ethereum is like really massively successful is in like getting a huge network effect around like ERC20, like and Solidity and all this stuff. And so like if you look at pretty much every new chain that's launching, I mean even we fell into this, is like that all these existing folks have their UI components built. Even if you strip out Ethereum, they have all their user flows and UX built around interacting with ERC20s, right? And so basically, there's just huge buy-in, huge lock-in around it. And the same goes for a lot of, there's people using Solidity on lots of different private chains. There's lots of different, Quorum, things like that have, run on the EVM, basically deploy the EVM, for new chains like Celo or Cosmos with Ethermint or Polkadot. All these guys are pretty focused on having ETH interop because of how much lock-in there is around the EVM, despite this being such a young industry. And so I think there's a lot of benefit to having this kind of network effect around, like if you, so the way I see it is like, if you get a lot of times when you have a big company that wants to, do a blockchain, a lot of times because they have a proponent of that technology or that platform inside of their organization. And so, but the problem is like they'll go to basically deploy Tezos, and it'll be a very awkward experience. Like it's like, well, wait a second, like I could just, even though I love Tezos, like everything I would normally do with Ethereum, like it's just like 10 times easier than anything I would do in Tezos. And basically, I think empowering those people is really worthwhile, and it doesn't take a lot of effort. And so I definitely think it's worth like really pursuing and sort of putting resources and effort behind this kind of stuff, because down the road now, so say you get 10 developers trained on Tezos, as those are 10 if even just those are 10 people that now have Tezos expertise, and some percentage of, if even 10, one or two of those people eventually build something on a weekend project that becomes like a really cool open source open finance DeFi type thing or a Web3 type application, like that's a win, and so I think just trying to get mind share, trying to get people bought into the technology as a form of network effect that extends the sort of the network effect around the distributed consensus and Tezos' status as a currency, I think is definitely worth doing, but only in service of the former.
Where can people see the work you're doing on interoperability and standards?
Yeah, so it's a lot of the work we've done so far is like really with in this sort of nascent TZIP repo, which hasn't gotten a lot of use like to date. It has a few very, very important standards in it so far. Like it has in addition to the asset ones, it also has TZIP 10, which is the wallet interaction standard, which AirGap and ACAD and Cryptonomic and others have been working on. I'm probably leaving people out, and I apologize. And then you'll have other stuff like that I think will come, sort of later, especially if you guys do like say a wallet working group. Like it would be great to include a lot of this stuff under that roof if possible. And then sort of I think it would be great eventually to move all of this under within Tezos Agora broadly, sort of thinking about it as sort of a platform for this kind of like sort of this neutral, like distributed consensus seeking sort of project that basically people can participate and basically build standards for around the ecosystem's needs. For example, I know the wallet working group will be under that sort of header, and then there will be other. I think it would be great to include. I mean, like for example, obviously we also have a bunch of materials around assets and oracles and things like that in our our assets portal, but I'm sure a lot of that stuff will eventually sort of make more integrated into other materials as well. But I think there's generally two components. There's going to be the implementation. There's three components. There's going to be the standard, the interface, all that stuff. There's going to be the implementations, and there's going to be the tooling. So like people who want to integrate into a wallet or an exchange or whatever, they can easily integrate sort of Tezos-based assets based on that. So I think I'd say look if you're interested in standards, go to the TZIP. If you're interested in reference implementations, go to assets. The assets portal. If you're interested in tooling and stuff like that, stay tuned. I think there's going to be some interesting stuff that emerges there. So I'd say that's my general.
Just for the sake of time, because I know you have a hard stop.
Yeah.
Do you want to get into a little bit about what we're doing with Agora in its second version? Because our first implementation was really just some basic governance. It's basically a basic governance explorer, which has really served its purpose in being able to easily show people who's voted, who hasn't voted, lay out the different periods, and really describe that, as well as provide a high signal form for ideas. And you'll notice that a lot of this is really just lurking in terms of sharing ideas and some minimal conversation unless something's very controversial. But it's sort of growing into something more, which seems to be that we're not trying to keep a moated project, but how can we make this more distributed? How can this become a really like decentralized, I guess you could call it like a project management type system?
Yeah, or like a hub of sorts. But yeah. I think the way I see it is like I think what we've discussed is like I think a few different cool opportunities. Like the first one is like sort of definitely trying to use it for like learn materials and on ramp and stuff like that. That seems like a no-brainer. I think another thing is like definitely integrating it into or like making the integration easy with like something like Film would be pretty worthwhile if you could make it easier for bakers to just dive right into proposals directly from, when they check the status of their baker, stuff like that would be really valuable. And then from there, there's like lots of interesting, things that can be done around, definitely around like other forms of, so things like signal voting, things like verifiable credentials where people, so if I'm, a smart contract language developer, I can, attest to my identity and then sort of put my weight behind a proposal or something like that so that people know that like this thing isn't just, sort of just random folks. So where I think I could see a lot of the Tezos amendment process going in general is sort of a multi-stakeholder thing where, the credibility of proposals is more easily identified based on like all sorts of different stakeholders, not just, not just like, sort of passing thoughts, but there should be like a really long lead time in which, folks can understand whether or not there's buy-in from all the people who are affected by a change. So if there's a change to Mickelson, then smart contract, it would be great to know from smart contract developers and smart contract language developers, authors, like basically what do they think? What kind of impact is it going to have? How much work is it going to be? Stuff like that. And so that, there's better information, better signals for bakers, whether or not like a change is like something that is safe, is interesting, is something that will add value to the, and network effects to the chain, stuff like that. And I think work around that is really valuable. I think, generally also participation badges. So one of the things, Shaun, you guys are looking into, and I'm really, really excited for, also especially because it leverages some of the techniques that's been in development, is the notion of participation badges, or even the notion of like community airdrop of like non-financial assets. Like, so like the notion of like, you get basically this badge for not holding your funds on an exchange or something like that. And so stuff like that, I'm pretty optimistic on. I think that could definitely be connected to Agora. Having Tezos-based identities on Agora is something I've been hearing about that I think is really, really promising and something that we should like, definitely pursue. So all of these sorts of things where you just have more measurement of participation and you have, sort of other ways of participating, better signals about the quality of proposals, and buy-in from different stakeholders that currently are hard to represent, and things like that, I think would be sort of a lot of the low-hanging fruit. And then also just general UI refinement in general with you guys. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited for the next rollout. I think identity is kind of a big point to push on. It's something that we envisioned very, very early on, for a separate social network.
Yeah.
It was never a great setup, but today I think it's a lot more realistic to try to approach it where you can just log in and connect using your ID.
Well, originally we also had spent a lot of time trying to figure out, before we launched Agora, trying to figure out basically how can you tie keybase-based identity to Tezos Agora. And what we found was like it was very, very awkward, very hard to do. Like there was integration, like they wanted built integration. I mean, maybe we should look back into it again. But it just didn't really like it just was a very cumbersome effort, and it was just going to take a long time to sort of really get to a place that we thought would be a nice user experience. I think building a native Tezos log in with your TZ1 type of experience would be a lot more reasonable, and I think we should support multiple variants of that. So I think if possible, if we could support log in with your favorite wallet or log in with these verifiable credentials, stuff like that would be great. And it'd be great to have for bakers to have Flare, language developers to have Flare, stuff like that. That basically allows you to and down the road, I think we should also reward people for participation and things like that with
some of what we want to get into. We really want to get into the NFT space. It's extremely important. I think there's just a lot that can be done there. The problem along the way is trying to make this accessible to everybody, make it opt-in, and not try to push any sort of standard on any specific individual or group. Yeah, totally. But yeah, I'm really optimistic about the notion of badges and things like that. I think that's really, really where it's a really, really interesting opportunity for us. Will, do we have any questions for Jacob before he has to drop off?
We actually have one question from the audience.
Okay.
Susan J asks, does TCF, TQ, and TF work together closely?
I think, I don't know, Shaun, if you want to take the TTF part, obviously, but I think in general, I think there's different levels of cooperation and coordination. So in certain areas, I mean, there's definitely involvement around, whether it's with some of the different internal committees of the TF or some of the sort of branding discussions around stuff like that. Not really as much, but there's definitely or things like sort of building doing integration projects and things with different projects that are generally either funded or connected to TF. But in terms of setting roadmaps internally, I think generally what we do is pretty separate from, it's pretty self-defined based on what we've identified and seen in the community and inputs we've gotten from sort of, folks in the community and stuff like that.
We've had more consensus activities recently, but historically we've had very, very limited interaction with TF. I've actually spent more time with the people at TQ and the people in the New York area, whether it's Cryptonomic, Obsidian Systems, and some of that is just due to proximity. But actually, historically, we haven't really been in any sort of inner circle as far as Tezos Commons. But yeah, recently, we've engaged in a number of meetings and such to try to build consensus around just common goods, because that's an area where we need everything to sort of either interrupt or decide that it's not worth interrupting on, or try to actually organize ourselves in some manner. So it's a difficult line between, all right, where does one end and where does one begin? And we need cooperation among the organizations to get things done. And if it's not there, then we just shouldn't push on something. But if there's something that's just sort of left in the open, there's a natural need for language interrupt. There's a natural need for some standards around wallets. And you have to get together the people that are going to be able to make that happen. And so, we all work together to the point that we really need it.
I think the key there too is that stuff like that, a wallet working group or a lot of these standard things, they really need to be close to the people using them, rather than academics and sort of ivory tower-ish. So I think that's what's really cool with what some of the stuff you guys are doing with wallets and other sort of efforts is really thinking about how do you build this as a consensus among people who actually, stakeholders actually are going to be affected, and I think that's great.
Hope that answers the question for him.
Yeah, so we actually have another question from the live stream. Tyler Coyne, hope I didn't butcher that. He asked, when can we expect the next protocol proposal?
Yeah, I don't know. You'd probably have to ask the folks at Nomadic about that, but hopefully soon.
Yeah, I'm surprised it's taking as long as it is. So hopefully soon. We'll have to get Nomadic on here. So I think this is good. If you need to drop off, Jacob, I know you have a hard stop in a few minutes.
Yeah, just probably I can jump off in queue. I don't know if there's any more questions. I'm happy to chat, but I'm happy to come on another time.
I think that's most of the questions. There's one more that I guess, Alex, you can answer this one if you like. Nice person asked, how does Alex think about the Tezos Foundation decision to settle the lawsuit for $20 million?
So,
Well, I was gonna say, I think this segues into our next section anyways.
Yeah, so maybe I'll also drop off, let you guys speak on all the legal stuff, and I'll
Well, hey,
great to, yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and I'll hope to come on another time.
Later, Jacob.
Cool.
See you,
Have
Jacob.
a great one. Yeah,
Take it
take
easy.
care, guys.
So I guess where we can kind of segue into this is, going back to that question of where and like, what do I see from the settlement with the Tezos Foundation? And really, my calculus and my analysis on why I, personally, why I think this settlement is a good thing is, it's really threefold. The first is that this provides closure for Tezos Foundation, and more importantly, the Brightmans. And what I mean by that is just that if you guys haven't ever been through litigation in the US, either federal or state litigation, it's very taxing, it's very emotional, and it's very time consuming, along with, the consumption of a ton of resources. And by having finality to this long saga that started in December 2017, we're now almost 2.5, close to 3 years out, that, this allows the Brightmans to, move on with their life and be happy and not have to worry about, the things that they say, because they're under the threat of litigation. Could be, whatever they say can be used against them later down the road and things like that. So, by having the settlement, it provides closure. On, the second fold of why I think this is also good is just that, we know that when the foundation went through the fundraiser, it had a record amount of, money raised. And that has basically made the Tezos ecosystem very healthy in terms of development and, using the funds correctly to, give grants out to deserving projects and to build the ecosystem. But, on that in the same vein, you have you're, entrenched in litigation where you're constantly paying attorney's fees, right? And me as an attorney, yes, all attorneys are expensive unless, you're going with a public defender. But they only defend criminal cases and not, civil cases. So, what we know about the litigation is that the Tezos Foundation also, they retained a big law firm, which has a very good track record and that has a very good reputation. But when you hire these big firms in these big city markets, the attorney's fees are astronomical. And so just kind of, if you think about it, let's just, we'll do a very, very simple hypothetical. And we'll say if the attorney's fees per month, because you have probably 2 different partners and then 4 or 5 associates, along with, 4 or 5 paralegals working on this. Let's just say all of their fees are added up to, let's just give a roundabout number of $1 million a month. So if the foundation was spending $1 million a month, and this, like I said, this is all hypothetical. I don't know what exactly they were spending on attorney's fees. I can just kind of give you a guesstimate based on my previous background. But $1 million per month on legal fees is not something outrageous, especially for this sort of litigation. But okay, so you're spending $1 million a month in attorney's fees. In this case, we know has been going on since December 2017, and we know that the settlement offer was, proposed on March 20th of this year. So you're at 2.5 years of litigation, and you add those fees up. So you're looking at, we'll say about 30 months, right? 30 months worth of litigation and attorney's fees. That is $30 million in itself, right? At $1 million a month. So by settling this at 26 million, by the time, let's just say, on the other hypothetical end that we decide not to settle, that we're going to litigate this. Everything's going well in the litigation, which it was, especially during the discovery battle. Everything's going well, and we're going to litigate this. We're going to take it all the way to trial, and we're going to try this case. Well, on March 20th, when that offer went, I looked at the docket for the Northern District of California in Federal District. The earliest day you could get for a trial date, that would be in the hypothetical world that you're not going to litigate any more small issues on discovery or any other issues, but just the main issue of was Tezos a security at the fundraising period. So you get a trial, let's say on a hypothetical perfect world, you get a trial date on March 20th. The date that they would give you for that trial date, the docket's already full. The earliest you could have gotten in for a trial date would have been probably about May 2021. So you're looking at another year's worth of, maybe a year and a half to another 2 years of attorney's fees at $1 million a month. So that if it's 2 years, that's 24 million, right? If it's 1.5 year, you're looking at 18 million. So, in the grand scheme of things, 26 million to settle this, it seems like the calculus, for a conservative person, and even, a liberal person, they would look at this that, hey, it makes more sense to just go ahead and sell this, close it out 26 million, as a sunk cost. We don't have to keep paying attorney's fees because they're defending us both in federal and state court. So all of a sudden you cut all those fees, all that money you would have spent, can be now deployed in the ecosystem. And, that in my mind, just the fees itself lends me credibility in terms of saying, yes, like this was a good thing. But, and then the third part of why I think the settlement is also ultimately a good thing is that when you take cases to trial, there's always the unknown, especially as a plaintiff's attorney. I can tell you when I handled a few personal injury cases as a plaintiff's attorney, what scares people to death is that when you invoke your right to a trial, that you pick a jury trial. Because when you pick a jury trial, you all of a sudden you have 12 individuals from, lay people that you select from a pool. You have 12 different personalities that you don't know exactly what's going on in their mind at that moment when you're making your case. And at any moment, they could decide, hey, I think Tezos was a security because, I woke up this morning and, my cat tripped me and I fell down and I had a bad morning. So I'm going to vote that this is a security. I'm going to find them guilty. Well, things like that goes on through jurors' minds that you can't predict. And it has that, unpredictable basis to it where if you could have the strongest case that you would still ultimately possibly lose because you have 12 people who decide otherwise based on whatever reason that they decide. And part of the American trial system is that you don't get to peek into their minds, and you don't get to ask them how they get to that decision of whether they find, Tezos as a security or not, guilty or not. Like, what we, value in the American trial system is that we value finality, whether the decision is right or wrong. We're going to, if it's decided by a jury, we're going to uphold that decision, and, we're going to go with it. And that itself adds that, that wild card to it, where you could get whacked by a big judgment because, they decided that you were a security. And, this is also like, whether Tezos is security or not, this is a very, very, very distinct legal question that I don't know if you want, 12 lay people to be, to be deciding this issue, because, it's attorneys on both sides feeding them information about, what is considered a security. Well, to this day, I myself, when I look at certain things, people ask me, is this a security or not? Well, the best answer I can give them is it depends. And, some days I'll feel a certain way about something, and another day I won't. And it's, just kind of shows that state of influx that this is in, because it's kind of a crapshoot. And,
so it's generally not clear.
Exactly.
It's not clear. It's very murky in terms of what is and what isn't. It's not something you want to leave the chance, and the math seems to point in the other direction in terms of making a decision.
To give people a little reference of the settlement, they think, 26 million might be astronomical or something like that. Just look at, another blockchain, EOS, right? Everyone knows EOS and Block One. They themselves settled with the SEC for, security violations of failure to register their, cryptocurrency as a security, and they paid the SEC $25 million. So that just kind of gives you a little range of, why this settlement is reasonable, in that sense that, there is precedent out there, and that's probably what they were working around. When you look at, when you read the pleadings and see when they started entering negotiation talks, well, the EOS settlement was in between their negotiation talks. So I'm sure they probably use that as a benchmark number to try to negotiate. And, ultimately, by settling, it adds finality, allows us to control something that we didn't really have control of, and really, no one had control of. But now it allows us to have a little control and to take care of the things and deploy funds and, that will support the ecosystem in a better way. And, all of a sudden we can look back and say, look, we went through this growing pain, and now we're able to move forward. And how do we better the ecosystem? There might have been funds that the foundation was afraid to deploy. And now, by removing this litigation aspect, you remove that, that scepter of possible, a little nervousness of, funding this project or that project. And all of a sudden, it's there's no bounds to where the ecosystem can grow, because we're not plagued by litigation anymore.
Uncertainty removed. I mean, it has been sort of like the dark cloud that's been looming over the project. So as much as I myself would like to fight the good fight, I do agree that at some point you have to move on and focus on actually like building out a sustainable ecosystem, services, and applications. There's much more to this than just the fundraiser as of 2017. And I think we're getting to the point where we just need to move on too. So it's not a bad thing overall for us.
Yeah, and earlier you were wanted to talk about the proof of stake and regulatory space. And this is kind of where I nerd out, because this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. And
well, I don't think a lot of people understand that just because proof of work had some level of clarity as to how it's being handled in terms of regulation, even though there wasn't like a formal framework in place, that, you know, it's been discussed for a number of years. So we have an idea of how proof of work will generally be handled. But proof of stake is brand new.
Yeah, so, you know, where all this kind of evolves from is, we know that, you know, that SEC, one of the top SEC directors, William Hinman, he went to a conference back in 2018, and he gave a talk where he says, in his mind, that his mind being the SEC mind, they're, you know, the two cryptocurrencies at that point of time that he doesn't believe are securities, because they are, in the coin of art term that he uses, is sufficiently decentralized, are Bitcoin and Ethereum. Now, let me give you a little caveats about this. When he says, you know, in his mind, or the SEC's mind, that they're not securities, that doesn't mean that by rule of law that automatically they're not securities. That just means it's his opinion, and it's the SEC's opinion. And until it gets challenged in court and a, you know, judgment is given out by a judge or by a jury, then we will know for certain if they are securities or not, right? So him saying that, oh, you know, in his mind, they're not securities. Well, that's just his opinion, SEC's opinion. Yes, it carries weight, but it's not a rule of law or anything that, you know, Bitcoin and Ethereum are not securities. Now, you know, in my paper, I talk about the way he uses those terms of art, sufficiently decentralized. Well, one of the topics I really hammer on is, what do you mean by sufficiently decentralized? Are you talking about the network in a whole? Or are you talking about wallet operators? Or are you talking about, you know, block producers? Like, what part of the network are you looking for to make it sufficiently decentralized, right? So in the Tezos ecosystem, are you talking about block producers, like having 419 bakers? Or are you talking about people just running nodes, right? Not necessarily writing blocks or endorsing, but just running a node. Like, you know, people run Bitcoin nodes all the time. They're not producing a block, but they just run the node. So, you know, what do you mean by sufficiently decentralized? And, you know, that is one of the things that people are trying to figure out. Is it, you know, are you looking at the network, and that there's, you know, not one aspect of it that makes it vulnerable to failing, that it's, you know, there's multiple nodes that if one node goes down, that, you know, the network still operates? Is that what you're looking at? You know, and things, or are you looking at development on, you know, the blockchain, like Ethereum, right? So when we think of Ethereum sufficiently decentralized, and, you know, funny story, just back up real quick. He premised his speech by saying, you know, he's like, when I talk about Ethereum, I'm talking about it today and not when Ethereum did its ICO. Well, you know, in his mind, he was kind of giving a little signal that probably Ethereum at its ICO state was probably a security, but now it's, you know, evolved and matured enough that it's sufficiently decentralized. Well, it goes back to that question: what about the Ethereum network is sufficiently decentralized? And now with Ethereum about to deploy, you know, 2.0 and become proof of stake, it adds an even greater, you know, cloud of uncertainty right now, because, you know, we don't know how the regulators really view proof of stake. We know that, you know, the sister organization of the SEC, the CFTC, the Commodities Future Trading Commission, you know, the director of the CFTC has said that they're keeping an eye on Ethereum 2.0, but, you know, it's getting closer and closer towards a security. But he hasn't flat out said that it was. And then, you know, he didn't give any signals of what he, you know, what aspects that he considers a security or not. And so this is kind of back into this uncertain area, kind of gray, mushy area that's kind of being defined as we go. And, you have multiple federal agencies that are fighting for turf, like the CFTC wants to have their finger on the crypto sphere, and so does the SEC. But what we know is that they can share some jurisdiction, but ultimately they will fight it out and say, we have, dominion over this area.
So it's a little bit of everything. I think a lot of people want answers to this stuff, but it sounds like it's going to take at least a few more years to hammer some of this stuff out. Or is that too short of a time frame? Or is it going to take 5 years, 10 years? Or are we basically just waiting? Because it seems like there's a lot of people that are reading the tea leaves and trying to make sense of it all, but it just seems to be a slow-moving process, much like litigation is.
Yep, and I think realistically, could we see mass movement within 2 or 3 years? I absolutely, can see that because, you have when I was talking about, groups like Facebook and Libra, they have an army of lobbyists that are constantly in the heads of Congress people, trying to push them along and trying to advocate for blockchain sphere. And with them advocating for this, you're starting to see more and more movement. And for instance, before just during this whole summer of 2019, even before summer of 2019, how many times did you hear about crypto in mainstream media and news? Like hardly ever, right? Really, the bull run of 2017 is when we heard about crypto. Then it kind of died out. But then all of a sudden, when Facebook Libra wanted to create their stablecoin, oh my gosh, all these Congress people start saying, we need to hold investigation. We want to hear conferences. We want to hear them come speak to us. And, all of a sudden, all of these politicians are, saying, Facebook Libra stablecoin is a danger this, danger that. But, the fact that they're talking about it is a good thing.
Yeah, it was helpful, but I think it was a 6-hour hearing, which was rather brutal because there was a majority of it was grandstanding on strange points or trying to dig up skeletons on Mark Zuckerberg. So that part was interesting. However, there were actually a few people that brought up some very interesting questions and showed a more advanced knowledge of the space. So I hope that as this conversation progresses, at least in the last, it'll almost be a year now, it's just coming up quick, that we're gonna see them slowly have it be a little bit more natural as to what is proof of work, what is proof of stake. We can only hope for so much. These are complex topics, much like you were saying earlier. Do you leave it to chance on the discussion of what is and isn't a security in such a complex industry, let alone the emergence of a totally new industry and market that hasn't really been seen before.
And I'm just looking at this space. It's being developed as we go, and based on my research, that I spent on my paper for SEC enforcement since 2017. Well, really since 2014, in the whole blockchain sphere. We're starting to see a few patterns, and especially 2019, a new pattern has kind of emerged where before the SEC really got involved with enforcement and jurisdiction, and jurisdiction-wise, they kind of ran on this premise of, hey, we're not going to act until we really need to. And they've been just kind of sitting back and just kind of watching it. But then there were few enforcement actions where they decided to kind of jump the gun and to prevent blockchains from launching. Like towards the end of 2019, we entered this new space where SEC first let people, blockchains really, when you look at the pattern of their enforcement, a lot of the enforcement actions came after when the blockchain launched. now, towards the end of 2019, especially with Kin and Telegram token, what you saw is that the SEC now decide to try to change the pace of saying, hey, we're going to enforce an action against you before the launch of your blockchain to try to prevent the launch. And so now we're kind of in this space of 2020 of trying to figure out, is that what they're going to try to do now to prevent blockchains from launching? Or are they just
I think those are different categories, though. Because when you look at like Telegram or Facebook, effectively you're getting into much, much larger network effects. Yeah. These companies or individuals or orgs, they have, far greater reach. So it is definitely a different class of, I think they're less concerned about an ERC20 token going out and reaching the market, because a lot of them didn't really actually launch like a mainnet of sorts. Or maybe they had like a native purpose on Ethereum, or it was a fork of something existing. But a lot of them got to the point where they probably launched the network, or they're building the application, or maybe they weren't building anything. Those seem to be what they ended up moving on, and it at least like violated like a clear guideline. So it seems like they're only acting in space that they absolutely know they can. But I also understand the reasoning to limit somebody with such influence like Facebook, but at the same time, like they're progressing the conversation forward. I just don't know if Libra will have as much teeth as it did before. It seems like they had to gut a lot of features, and it has a lot less support than it did before.
Yeah, and it seems like Libra, they're gonna keep pushing, and they're gonna eventually launch very soon, with or without regulatory approvals. They say they're not going to launch without the blessing of the regulators, but ultimately what we know in this space is that once the cat is out of the bag, you can't put it back in the bag. And I think the regulators are they've learned that lesson, and that's what they're trying to do to prevent Kin and Telegram tokens from being launched, because they know that they even say it in their Telegram pleading against the Ton network that, look, once it's deployed, there's no going back, and no one can stop it at that point. So I can see why the SEC is starting to take that stance of trying to prevent, but ultimately I know in my opinion, that the SEC, are they going to give a clear regulatory framework of how to, act in this space? Probably not. The closest we've gotten is the digital framework, which they released in July of 2019. But it's like, if you are bored and wanting to see how confusing it is, just Google SEC digital framework. You'll see it's about 37 pages. And there's, over 37 factors with a bunch of ancillary smaller factors that they list. And after you read the full thing, I'm sure you're going to be confused, because they say, there's a bunch of language, not one factor is weighted more favorably than another. And then so by the time you, read it, you're still in this state of confusion of, what do they really mean by all this? So,
So much of this, we're just going to be waiting out, and likely we'll get at least it sounds like the answers will become clearer over time, but we're never going to have like finality on a clear cut of what is or what isn't, because it's an entire industry of sort of reading into that anyways. But I think more relevant for people watching, especially related to Tezos, is with the conclusion of this lawsuit, there's talk of settlements, and whether people can actually participate in those for what's given out. I don't know if you've received any questions on this.
Yeah, so a few people have asked me how do they get involved with the settlement, if they want, whether if they apply for the settlement and they qualify for it, will that take funds out of the quote unquote greedy lawyers' hands and the greedy plaintiffs. And, you know, ultimately the short answer that I will say is yes. That, you know, the more claims that there are that are, you know, well, one, let me just back up for a second. Until the settlement actually gets finalized, which we're hoping June 4th, 2020, which is right now it just needs Judge Seaberg's blessing to sign off on the settlement, which in my opinion is very, very high based on the pleadings saying that they've, you know, gone through 2 rounds of mediation arbitration, and one of them was even done by a retired judge. So, and the retired judge says that the settlement is reasonable. So, you know, in my mind, I think it is, the settlement will go through. But until he signs off on it, you know, we're just all we're talking about hypothetical trading. But based on, you know, the settlement documents, if, you know, they have 3 different classes of people that can, that are eligible to make a claim on this. And, you know, you know, the funds distributed and the people who approve the claims is going to be the claim administrator, which is a third party, separate third party that handles all of this. And they will decide, you know, what claim to pay out, and how much. But basically, you know, they're going to have in my mind, they're going to have a set sort of structure of the 3 different tiers of people that can qualify. And, you know, the people that will get closer for, you know, the dollar to dollar that they paid and that they haven't received any funds are going to be the people, you know, who lost their fundraiser passwords and were never able to activate their fundraiser accounts. And so those people will get probably majority of their funds back. And then, you know, the second tier of people that will get the second most amount of money will be the people who had held Tezos and they traded during a certain period and traded at a loss. They will get, you know, not as close to the dollar to dollar match like the people who lost their passwords, but they will get, you know, closer to the dollar for their losses. And then the third class of people that will probably get the least amount for their dollar to dollar will be the people who just held Tezos from the fundraiser till, I think the date was something around November 2019, and they will get, you know, probably, you know, a quarter of a dollar to their dollar that they spent. Now, will that take away from the plaintiffs and plaintiff attorneys? Well, the plaintiff attorneys are going to get their money. It's going to, you know, be decided upon by the judge in terms of settlement, and they will just get a fixed amount cut out to the plaintiff's attorneys. Now, the class plaintiffs, they usually will get a little more because they were the ones who initiated this and they took the risk as the representatives. So they will get a little more than the other people that are making claims. And, you know, but ultimately let's say, you know, Joe Blow of Arizona makes a claim. Will that affect the plaintiff's pot and the lawyer's pot? In a way, yes, but ultimately, like, in the long run, probably not as much as people think. And, you know, if people are thinking about making a claim, you absolutely have the right to make a claim if you know, are eligible based on those factors. Once the, you know, full terms of the settlement is released, if you qualify, you absolutely have the right to make a claim. Should you make a claim? I think that is, you know, up to that person and whether, you know, if they've lost funds, then, you know, they need to be thinking about if they lost funds and, you know, in terms of their loyalty or, you know, loyalty to the Tezos network and things like that. I would say, you know, really do not make your, you know, assessment of whether you should partake in the settlement or not based on your loyalty to the network. It should be, you know, based on what's going on in your life, also whether you're eligible. And if you've lost money, then you should have, you know, in my mind, you should make a claim. And those claims are set out for people that are eligible.
So maybe you can make some of that information available as it comes out.
Yeah, absolutely.
People can stay informed. Yeah, the other person who actually doesn't get a lot of credit is from the Tezos Recovery channel. It was Lord Dark Helmet. He helped a lot of people recover their passwords over time. So if you see him on Telegram, tell him thank you, because he helped a lot of people in terms of brute forcing fundraiser passwords. So there's been a lot of people that have helped over time, but there's still a number of people who lost their password during that fundraiser. So, all right. So Alex, where can they read more about your work?
Well, you can follow me on Medium. I do most of my publications on Medium, and I do pretty much all of them through Medium on Tezos Commons. So anytime I write something, it usually goes through Tezos Commons and pushes on Medium. But I'm also shortly I'll be posting on my Medium page about my SSRN page, which is like the Social Research Network. And this is kind of where a lot of the legal academics and peer review goes on. Right now I'm I would say, closer to the final stages of finishing peer review, and then once it's been fully reviewed, I'm gonna be applying to certain law review journals to get it published nationally. And if you guys have questions, you should know that I'm probably by now that I'm on Telegram quite a bit, and on Riot a few, not as much as I am on Telegram as Riot as I am on Telegram, but usually on Telegram, very easily accessible there, or even on Twitter. If you guys have any questions, you can always email me or tweet me, or write on
What's your email address?
My email address, alex@tezoscommons.org. Very simple. So if you have any questions, shoot me an email. I usually respond very quickly. And, I think we're all at this point in quarantine, so I have quite a bit of time on my hand. So if you have any questions, send them my way, and I'll try to answer them as soon as possible.
Awesome.
Thanks for the input, Alex. I think we can just go ahead and wrap it up here. Before we do, though, I would like to thank Danny Willems for responding to Tyler's question from the audience regarding the upcoming proposed protocol amendment.
Awesome.
Thanks for participating, guys.
Yeah. Until next time.
Hey.